There are often unknown problems with people's squats, and when ignored, have the potential to damage their joints, adversely affecting their long-term health and function. As a physical therapist, I can tell you that nearly everyone who has terrible joints has an even worse squat technique, whether they're aware of it or not. If you've been squatting for a while, or if you're just getting started, here are some things that I would keep in mind as you continue. A stable foot is important for a squat because this helps keep the knee and the hip in proper alignment as you go through the motion. I want you to think of your foot as a tripod. At the heel, you have one support. At the base of the big toe, you have another support. And then at the base of the pinky toe, you have the third support. When all three of these supports have pressure into the ground, the foot is stable, meaning that we won't see any deviations upstream in the knee or hip. However, if the foot is rocking side to side or the heel is lifting up, suddenly it's less stable, meaning that upstream we are far more likely to have some sort of injury. Going along with this, if you squat in a tennis shoe or a running shoe, what you'll have is this squishy, unstable surface underneath the foot, which is then going to affect that stability. For the same reason that when you run or walk on sand, every step is much harder because the sand is absorbing your energy as you push down. If you're squatting on something squishy, not only will it be harder to squat because you're losing efficiency in that movement as you push into the squishy shoe, you'll also be a little bit more unstable, meaning that your leg is now more susceptible to injury. The specific motion in regards to ankle mobility that we're talking about is called dorsiflexion. Now, this is a measure of how far the knee can translate forward relative to the foot when you're doing a squat. The reason that this is important is because if it's really restricted, we generally have to lean our torso much farther forward in order to stay balanced as you squat. This not only places a lot more stress on the back and hips, but people try and compensate for a lack of ankle mobility by flattening the arch, which also isn't great because now we've compromised that foot stability. A good way to stretch this out is to get into a deep squat position with a weight out in front of you and your arms resting on your knees. Now, from this position, you can slowly shift side to side and then hold it on each side, and you should feel either the calf or the ankle joint stretching out in that position. What that pronation or flattening of the arch does to the knees is called knee valgus. Long-term exposure to significant degrees of this knee valgus, that inward motion, is going to cause some problems for you. The reason is that this is a somewhat unnatural position when you're squatting. Many people don't know this, but the lower leg or the tibia should do what's called internal rotation as you squat, meaning that when your leg or your knee is straight, the kneecap and your foot are lined up, and then as you squat, the toes should turn in slightly relative to the kneecap, meaning that you have rotated a little bit. Now, we already talked about how flattening of the arch can cause this knee valgus, and that you want to maintain good foot stability as well as ankle mobility. But another cause of this, especially in women, is weakness of your hip abduction muscles, likely the gluteus medius muscle. A good way to strengthen this muscle is to get on your side into a side plank position. From this position, with the bottom leg bent, top leg straight, from here you can lift that top leg up and down. I like to make sure that my toes are turned down slightly because this will help bias the specific muscle. We also want to make sure that the hip is not in a bent or flexed position. So with the leg straight, you're going to kick it back behind you slightly as you lift up and down. If you're doing it correctly, you should feel it on the outside and a little bit farther back into the glutes. Having good hip mobility with any sort of squatting motion is essential because if the hip is restricted in motion, a lot of times the compensations are seen in the back, which causes long-term low back pain. Now with the squat specifically, this is generally different for every single person because everybody has a different anatomical structure and they have a different foot placement during the squat. So the farther apart your feet are when you squat, the more external rotation you need, and then the farther or the closer together your feet are, the more internal rotation you need. A good way to target external rotation is to get into that wide, deep squat. Place your elbows on the insides of your knees and then force them outward. A way that I like to target internal rotation for people with a more narrow squat width is to get down into a crab walk position, place the foot I want to stretch out to the side, and then pull that knee down and in towards the ground. If tight, you should feel a stretch up in the hip. With squatting, especially a weighted squat or a barbell squat, you want to make sure that your core muscles are engaged the whole time so that your lumbar spine stays stable. When they're not engaged, you allow some sort of movement through the low back, which not only makes the movement less efficient, it also makes you more prone to injury because you have less support for that lumbar spine. A good way to think about this is to place your fingers into your abdomen when it's relaxed. Now, you're going to squeeze your ab muscles to push your hands away from the abdomen. If you can maintain this contraction throughout the squat, your muscles will help to stabilize the spine. Now, this brings up the question of whether or not you should use a weightlifting belt when squatting. Think about it like this. When you use that weightlifting belt, the belt is basically serving to do the same purpose that these muscles are supposed to do. Now, long term, if you use the belt all the time, your body will become more or less dependent on the belt, and you won't necessarily have to intentionally fire your core muscles, which probably isn't a great thing, especially if you're outside of the gym, maybe you're helping your friend move a heavy piece of furniture. You won't naturally brace your core like you otherwise should. Now, in this position, you are now more likely to get injured. Long term, I think it's best not to use a belt so that you can learn to stabilize your core without that external support, and then that you can use for any sort of lifting or functional activity that you do, hopefully helping you avoid low back pain with whatever that may be. I hope you found that helpful. If you did, go ahead and hit that like button so that other people can find this video as well. Otherwise, I will see you next time.